Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're doing another wishful thinking video, so a series where I like to go over random ass ideas that I would love to see get made into a game one day. And today's gonna be a very special one because I'm talking about one of my all-time favorite RPGs being Shadow Hearts. Yeah, it gives me another excuse to talk about this series again because I just love it to death so much. But as you all know, the series is one of those games that I feel like that it didn't get the recognition that I think it truly deserved, and unfortunately was short-lived. And the original company is not around anymore, and the IP apparently has been recently trademarked. But of course, just because they did a trademark doesn't mean they're going to be making a new game. I mean, there's been many other instances where like Capcom and Square Enix have re-trademarked some of their old IPs, but yet nothing came with it. So that's why I'm not trying to get all excited about it as much as I want to. So instead, I want to talk about just some little ideas that I would love to see if they ever did make like a new Shadow Hearts game, or if they did like a remake of the series. Because I do think that it is a series, I think that should get like a reboot sort of thing, as long as it's done right, of course. And before we begin, I do have one important thing I want to mention, is that in case you haven't played any of these games and you really wanted to, well, I'm gonna say that this video will have some spoiler stuff about some of the endings of these games, so if you haven't played them and you really want to, then I would recommend not watching the video unless you don't care, but you know, I just figured I might as well mention that first. Because at least when I reviewed the series way back, I didn't want to get into the spoiler stuff, because I do think people should try out the series, without knowing, a shit ton of things about it. But I think this is a video that I can at least talk about all that type of stuff now. So alright, now let's get talking about, what would happen if they did, a remake of the first game. So when it comes to the story, I think it should still consistently be with, the same vein as the original game. Of course, you know, you can add in, little, other ideas that maybe didn't make it into the game, because there was actually quite a few cut content that was in the first game. For an example, the character Kawashima, she was supposed to be a playable character in the game. In fact, there's actually a way that you can actually hack her character model into the game. But of course, it's very buggy and all that, but still, kind of an interesting little thing that is in the game. But yes, that would be pretty cool if there was a section where you can actually play as her, or maybe get her more involved with the main party after a certain point. So that could be a pretty interesting direction that they could take with that. And of course, they can also add in new locations that were not in the first game, more places that you can go to in Shanghai and more places to go to in Europe. And one thing I do have to mention with the story though is that, do you guys think it should take place entirely start fresh from the first game, or do we think we should take it place right after the good ending of Covenant? Because here's the confusing thing, is that with the good ending in Shadow Hearts 2, Yuri starts back from the beginning part of the first game, but he retains all his memories, and his mother Anne ends up being replaced by Karen after the events. So yeah, it's a little weird, but as cool as it would be to continue off from there, I think it might be for the best if they just did a complete refresh, mainly because, you know, these games are old, and of course, not a lot of people played these games when they were new, and even after all these years later, the fanbase has grown quite a lot over the years, mainly due to a cult status. But I'm still unsure if it's still on the same number as other great RPG series out there. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell, but I think it would be a safe bet just so to start from the very beginning, just so there's any new people that never played any of these games at all and it wouldn't be any confusing for them. And plus, you gotta remember, not everyone still has a PS2 lying around and also doesn't have a way to emulate these games. And speaking of ways to play them, I think it would be best if they try to release it on as much platforms as possible, at least out of the main ones, like PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and the Switch, or whatever other Nintendo console comes out after. Now, I'm sure a lot of people would want it to be a PlayStation exclusive because, you know, all the games were only released on PS2, but I think in this day and age, I think it probably is best just to release it on more things because, you know, more people get to play them. And as for the gameplay itself, honestly, there's really not many changes you really need to do with it because I think the gameplay is already great as it is. But I do think that playing the events of the first game with all the crazy stuff that they added in with the second and the third game would be really awesome though, being able to customize your judgment ring by having many different attacks and all that, and also having the crest system or something sort of like that. I think all of that would be very nice inclusions. And I'd also like for them to have a 4-person party rather than 3. So yeah, not much I really need to say on that because, well, the gameplay, as you know, is a hell lot of fun and surprisingly really addicting for a turn-based RPG. So now, as for the game's graphics, well, as much as I do love the original games, like pre-rendered backgrounds, I still think they look really beautiful to this day, but as much as I like it though, I think they should actually do, like, take it up a bit more and make it a little bit more modernish, sort of like what they did with, like, the second and third game where everything's all 3D, but of course make it look way better than that. I'm not really too picky when it comes to graphics, as long as it still fits with the dark tone, and of course has like some sort of like anime art style that just looks really nice. I can't really think of a modern game that has like an anime art style but also has like some dark horror vibes to it. I guess that just goes to show you how awesome and kick-ass this game really was. And as for the game's music, I think they should provide 2 different soundtracks, the original and of course a brand new one with some arranged stuff. Just like in Resident Evil 2 Remake, you can choose between either picking the classic soundtrack or the new one. I think this game should have something like that too. The only problem is that if they did wanted to like reuse like the old soundtrack, I think they have to go through a lot of different stuff just to get the rights to it due to the fact that, you know, it was made by a completely different company at the time, and of course you'd try to have to get all those like composers back in line. And those composers being Yoshitaka Hirota, Masaharu Iwata, Yasunori Mitsuda, and Ryo Fukuda. And yes, I had to name them all because I do think that they all deserve to get credited for this, because it always seems like whenever you type in, like, the composer for Shadow Hearts, they always just bring up Yasunori Mitsuda just because, you know, he's the most well-known guy on the team. So I think it's a little unfair just to credit him and leave out everyone else, so yeah, but they all did a really good job though. So if there was a way for them to like bring back some of these guys to like do some like rearranged stuff, I'd be perfectly a-okay with that. Alright, and time for the fun part, and that being the voice acting. So as you know, the original Shadow Hearts game did have voice acting in it, but barely any of it. In fact, all the voices were all done by the 4Kids cast. And I found out the reason why. It was because the studio that was doing the recording for this game took place in the same building that 4Kids was doing their stuff. So basically, whenever like the actors were done recording a session for like, let's say Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh or whatever, and then they just move on and try to do here to get some more money. So yeah, kind of funny how that worked. But yes, I would love to have more voice dialogue for the first game. That would have been really great. Kind of like what they did with the second and third game, where there was way more voice acting in it. Also, maybe just for fun, I don't know if they would be able to do this, but it would be kind of cool if they had like a little bit of a like a conversation system, like as you're like walking on the field. Kind of similar to what the Trails of series has, where like sometimes you'll be walking on the field and then like characters will randomly start talking about like random shit. It could add a lot more funny stuff to the characters. Or maybe instead of that, they can have like the whole skit system that the Tales of series has, like whenever you like examine something in the background, they'll start having a conversation about it. But now, here comes the really fun part about this, is that who would I want to be a part of the cast? Now, yes, obviously, I want to try and do this in being like somewhat realistic here, so obviously I'm not going to try to name off like random ass like Hollywood actors like William Dafoe, Nicolas Cage, and Arnold, you know, like as cool as it would be to have that, I know it would never happen. Plus, having big actors involved in this does not mean that the voice acting is going to be automatically good, because, well, look at the very first Yakuza game. As hilarious as the dub was, I can't call it like a serious good dub because like the direction was just all over the place. So yeah, for this I decided to pick out some random voice actors that I really like that I think could be fitting for the characters, with the right direction of course. And it was really fun to go through all this, but of course I would like to see some of your guys' take on some of these too, since I'm pretty sure there might be other people that also could be fitting that I didn't think of, so here it goes. So as for our main character Yuri, now I will say, casting someone as Yuri is pretty difficult because he's young, he's dark, but he's not like high-pitched and squealy like some of these like main protagonists in like your typical high school animes, but he's also not over the top with like manly muscles or anything. And while I do think that the voice for him in the second game being done by Joe Capel, he was really good, especially towards later on in the game, but the thing is, it might be very hard to get him involved given that he doesn't really voice act that much anymore. In fact, the last thing that he did was that he was an extra for The Last of Us 2, and then before that it was 2014, so yeah, the guy is not super active unfortunately, but if he did return, I would be happy, but in case they had to pick a new guy for it, I think I have an idea, and the guy I picked for this was Greg Choon. Not only does he have like a really good range of voices, and he's just really good from the stuff that I've heard from him, but the one role that made me think a little bit of Yuri was his role that he did for the AI Somnian files for the main character, and that being Detective Dante, where they are both like young, like dark characters that also do have some funny dialogue, and I think it could work really well. And just for some characters, I'll play some voice comparisons so you can kind of hear what I mean.
I wonder what Renji was doing last night. I did call him a few times. He didn't answer. I've been thinking a lot lately. About myself, if I have another mind inside me. Am I really me?
Alright, let's do this! Fuck! Yeah!
And as for the voice of Alice, in the first game she was voiced by Veronica Taylor, and she is still active to this day, but I'm unsure if she would be willing to return for something like this, given that like she barely remembers doing it. But I think it could be interesting with the right direction, and of course the voice of Alice in the second game was done by Michelle Ruff, another great voice actor who is still going on today, but as again, if they did have to like recast to someone else, I have two ideas. And those being Amber Lee Connors and Rena Strober. Now, the reason why I mention Amber Lee is because not only does she have some good range, and I think she could play a good character like this, but the other thing that's also kind of ironic and funny was that she actually did cosplay as the character Alice, and that just would be amusing if she did that. And she also said that if they ever were to make a new Shadow Hearts game, she would love to be a part of it. So it's always cool to hear about a voice actor that you like being a fan of something that you also like. And as for Rena Strober, now she's mostly a musician, but she has done quite a few acting roles, but the one that made me think of Alice a little bit was the role that she did for Akane from Zero Escape 999, and there was also Emma from Trails of Cold Steel. I think she could actually match that pretty well. And as for our favorite spy character, Margaret, I think a great voice for her would be Megan Hollinshed. Now, most people know her as Mai Valentine from Yu-Gi-Oh!, which would be a pretty fitting voice for her, but another voice that she does that I really do like a lot is the voice of Lenneth from Valkyrie Profile.
By the holy laws, you shall be obliterated. No struggle is without meaning.
And as for the old man Zhu Zhen, or what I always used to call him was Old Spice, the voice I picked for him was Todd Haberkorn. And I know what you're thinking, really? You're gonna pick that guy who does Natsu from Fairy Tail? What the fuck's wrong with you? Well, here's the thing. If you ever heard the voice that he did for Rowan from Tales of Xillia, I thought he was awesome as him. In fact, he was actually one of my favorite characters, and after hearing it, I can definitely see him being Zhu Zhen really well. Plus, having Todd Haberkorn do like old man roles, I think is very underrated, and I think he should do them more often because he's really good at it.
I have been in the service of Lord Klein for about 2 years now. He is a fine ruler despite his youth. He believes in freedom and equality for his people. If he has any real flaw, it's that he spoils Lady Dressel too much. Please, allow me to handle this. Oh dear me, what a fearsome trio. A bit on the sloppy side, though. You two in the rear. Isn't your formation a little wide? If you stand so far apart, how will you help your comrades in a moment of crisis?
And now, as for the voice of Keith, our favorite vampire character, now I have two ideas for him, and one of them might be a little bit hard to get a hold of, and that being Matthew Mercer. I think that would be really awesome to have him as a vampire character. But in case they can't get him, the other guy I had in mind was Taliesin Jaffe, who is known for doing, as again, another Zero Escape role, being Snake.
I don't wish to toot my own horn, but my auditory senses are considerably more advanced than those of most humans. I notice even the slightest of noises. No, such a thing would be impossible. However, by listening to the sound of footsteps and breathing, as well as sound echoing off the environment, I can locate most objects.
And as for the last character that joins the party, being Holly, I think there are two roles I got for here too, one of them being Brianna Siddle, who usually does a really good job playing like little kid characters, but the only thing is that she hasn't really done a lot in recent years. So as for another one I had in mind was Julianne Taylor, another voice actor who has done a really good job with that same style of voice. And as for Roger Bacon, and of course, I mean the real Roger Bacon, not the pretend one, This is another one that kind of took me a bit of time to start thinking of someone that could do it really well. Personally, I would love for them to bring back the original actor for him for the game Kudelka, but that seems very unlikely given that, like, everyone who was a part of that cast literally did nothing afterwards. Well, except for Sarah Paxton, but, you know, that's a whole other story. So the one that I thought of for Roger Bacon, and even then, I'm still unsure if it would be the best role, but it could be interesting to say the least, and that was Paul Eating. His most notable role was Colonel Campbell in the Metal Gear series, and he's also done voices in Ben 10 and even Warcraft, so he has some pretty good range. And of course, I'm not expecting him to do like those exact voices for Roger Bacon, but I think he could come up with something interesting for him. And plus, I love Paul Eating and would love to see him being in like more games again. And as for Albert Simon, you know, like one of the coolest villains in the series, I wish they would actually bring back Paul St. Peter, the voice that he did for the second game. Now that was like a perfect casting choice in my opinion, like the way how he did like his British speaking when he was talking to Yuri during that one scene, like that was fucking awesome. And also Paul St. Peter is also really good at doing like kind of like the more like badass voices too, so he can utilize that in a way where whenever like Albert Simon is like doing some like fucked up shit with people. And as for the secondary villain, Du Huai, I have two people listed for this, and that being Kirk Thornton and David Brimmer. So Kirk Thornton is one of my all-time favorites, and he usually does a great job playing like older people and also playing like badass characters, so, well, put them together, and I think it would work really well. And David Brimmer, his best role in my opinion, would have to be the voice he did for Zod from Berserk. So after hearing that, he is really good at playing an evil character. I kinda wish he did it more often. And as for Sergeant Kato, I actually wish they brought back Jameson Price to do it again, since, as again, he's still active to this day, and he's also one of my many all-time favorite actors as well. And as for Yoshiko Kawashima, the character that was supposed to be playable originally, I also have two voices for her in mind, and that being Elizabeth Maxwell and Cherami Leigh. Both of them really know how to do like tough, strong women that know how to get shit done. For an example, Elizabeth Maxwell was, say, Najima from Persona 5.
Are you a high school student? Where do you attend? I've heard that things are rough right now. A teacher named Kamoshida confessed his crimes like he was a completely different person, supposedly. And it happened all of a sudden one day. Can a person's mental state change so easily?
And Cherami Leigh has done quite a lot of different roles that are very similar, so yeah, I think either one of them could work. And then finally I'll mention is the character Kudelka, who, like I said, I would love to see the original actor come back for her, but chances are very unlikely. So, instead, I decided to pick Karen Strassman, who is also one of my all-time favorites. Plus, another thing that's kind of amusing between the two is that they actually do kind of look very similar to each other. And just for fun, I decided to throw in some extra roles just to see like who else I would love to see get into this if they were like, you know, some of the more minor characters or whatnot. And yeah, I know some of these might not ever happen, like for example, like Liam O'Brien would be really hard to get involved, though I would love to see him in a Shadow Hearts game one day. And as again, David Hayter would be another one that would be tough to get into, but as again, it would be fucking awesome. So yeah, that's all I have to say about the voice cast of what I wish I would have for this game if I was the voice director, and if I actually knew, like, what the fuck I was doing, because, you know, voice direction is not easy, I'll say that. So with that out of the way, that's really all I have to say about a Shadow Hearts remake. Like, I really don't really expect, like, really a whole lot of changes, really. Just, you know, some nice graphical updates, maybe some new, like, arranged soundtrack, more voice acting, and just some of the improvements that the other games had later. So now let's get into what if they wanted to do like a brand new game, like total restart, like everything, like totally different characters and all that. Well, for me personally, I think a really cool setting that they could do is that they can do a World War II setting. Since the other games take place in World War I, why not take it to 2? And besides, there'd be a lot of really interesting like locations they can go to, and they can also deal with like the Nazis. In fact, the whole idea of like killing a bunch of Nazis in a Shadow Hearts game, that'd be pretty awesome. So then Persona 2 can't be the only RPG where you get to kill Hitler in it. And given that it has to deal with this like serious topic, I think it should need to go back to like the dark tone that like the first two games had. And of course, I don't have a problem with like goofy shit like in the third game had, but the problem is that I just didn't think it like fit well with the series, and it just wasn't like funny at all, I found. So I just think it just needs to go back to basics. And one historical character that I think would be interesting if they included it, since as you know, the series series does include historical figures, was a Spanish spy named Juan Garcia. Now, I don't want to go into a whole biography on the guy, but I just want to, like, put it out there that I thought he was a very interesting person to learn about, and plus, he was actually, like, incredibly smart. Like, he even outsmarted the Nazis, like, many times. So seeing a character like him into a game would be pretty interesting to see how it would work. And there's many different events they can get involved with, such as like D-Day, Operation Barbarossa, and the Soviet offense, just to name a few. And I think that's all I'm going to mention for the World War II setting. As much as I'd love to talk more about it, this video is starting to get a little long, and I kind of want to mention like a couple other things before we end it. So another interesting set piece that could make for an interesting game is maybe take place in like the 1970s, or even the 80s even. Given how like everything nowadays wants to be like the 80s now, I guess it would probably fit well for that. But I think it could be interesting if they were to go with like either of those two decades, given that like a lot of horror movies were pretty big during those times. Like maybe with the 70s they can mention like a lot of like possession and lots of stuff with like the devil, and then with the 80s they can have like a lot more like cheesy like B-movie type of stuff. Just one goofy example I can think of was a movie called The Stuff, which is literally about killer yogurt. They could implement something like that into a Shadow Hearts game, and yeah, it would be goofy, but it'd be kind of fun, and it would actually kind of fit well with the series, I think. But one last thing that I do want to mention with the whole like next Shadow Hearts game was that there was actually an interview on Geek Gamer that happened to do an interview with the creator of the series, Matsudo Machida, and he mentioned that he actually did some little like concept art for a possible third game, and it actually has two characters, being Yuri's dad and Kurando's dad. So this tells me that they were probably planning on wanting to do like a prequel to the first two games, and hell, it might even be a prequel to even Kudelka even. And I think that would have been really awesome as well, the way how they can make that work, but unfortunately, as you know, it never got made. But if it ever did happen at this point in time, it could be a good way to get more people to get like invested into the series from the very beginning, and without worrying about anything confusing. So that's all I gotta say on this topic. Of course, I would love to do more on this, but, you know, we'd be here forever. But just for the sake of sanity, what are some ideas that you guys have that you would love to see in, like, a new game, or, like, a remake, or, like, any of the other things I suggested? Like, what do you guys think? But I should also mention that I know there are going to be some people out there that will say that, like, the series doesn't need a remake because the game is already really good as it is, and yeah, I 100% agree with you, the game is great as it is, but I'm just saying that, like, I would love to see, like, a new entry in some way, shape, or form, because this series desperately needs to come back, and I do think that doing a remake is probably the safest bet that they can do, or actually even easier would probably be just a simple, like, update remaster. But that's just if they can get a hold of the license and whatnot. Which, of course, I don't really want to get into here, given that, you know, like, it's kind of like a long and boring conversation, but yeah, like I said, like, I'd be pretty happy with, like, almost anything if they came out with. But if there's one funny thing I have to mention out there, is that someone out there really needs to do a ROM hack of Mario Kart 64, or really any Mario Kart game, and then put it with Shadow Hearts characters, and then call it Shadow Karts. Now that shit right there really needs to happen, and that's all I'm going to end it off with. So thanks for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.